Welcome to everyone who just joined us. We're introducing ourselves in the chat. We're going to get started here in about 1 or 2 more minutes, just as we let people trickle in. I know it's still a little early for a Saturday, so I want to give people some time to join us. Special thanks to all the teachers joining with us today. It's great to see y'all represented. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started and let people in as they are able to join us. Thank you for being with us today. This is the session and discussion exploring Afro-Latino identity through the arts. This is part of the North Carolina Latin American Film Festival, which just kicked off on Thursday evening and will run for the next few days, exploring the theme of Afrovisualidades. We have with us today Dr. Miguel Rojas Sotelo, Tina Luis Vasquez, and Melissa Riotas, excuse me. And I will be moderating the discussion. My name is Corinne Zaragoza. I am the outreach coordinator of the UNC Duke Consortium in Latin American and Caribbean Studies, and I'm very excited to be with this really great trio of artists to explore our theme today. I know y'all are in for a real treat. A few Zoom etiquette reminders, which I'm sure most of you all know by now. Please mute yourself during the presentation, the discussion. That mute button is in the bottom left-hand corner there. That way we're able to hear the speakers. To improve internet connectivity for all, please keep your video off during the presentation. When we go into the Q&A session at the end, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself, take your video off, and ask your questions then. And in the meantime, if as we're going through the conversation, if something pops into your mind, please feel free to put it in the chat and we'll get to that at the very end. I know sometimes you think of something and you don't want to forget it, so please feel free to put it in the chat and we'll definitely get to your questions. A few workshop session notes to note. This discussion is a part of the NCLAFF. You are encouraged to watch some of the films. We have them streaming online and we have a few events in person. And you're welcome to attend the screenings of the films and the other workshops as part of the festival. It's free and open to the public. If you're interested in seeing a schedule of events, you can see that at nclatinamericanfilmfestival.org. And I will put that in the chat at the end, or if someone wants to put that in now, that would be wonderful. We have a full schedule of events that Miguel has planned. Again, if you're a teacher and press the wrong button. If you're a teacher and you would like to receive a certificate of completion that you can submit to your district for CEUs, there's a brief survey that will be offered at the end of the session. And I'll give you that link at the end, and you can just very quickly fill out that survey and give us your feedback, and then we'll give you a certificate of completion by the end of the month. All right, we're going to go ahead and delve into our discussion here. I'm going to introduce our amazing panelists. We have with us today Miguel Rojas Sotelo. He holds a PhD in Visual Studies, Contemporary Art, and Cultural Theory with an MA in Modern and Contemporary Art from the University of Pittsburgh and MFA on Visual Arts from the Universidad de los Andes. Miguel was the Colombian Ministry of Culture's first visual arts director from 1997 to 2001, where he worked building participatory cultural policy. Miguel has worked independently as a filmmaker, curator, author, and critic ever since. He works at the intersection of critical human geography, ethnic studies, visual anthropology, environmental and health humanities, and cultural theory. As a scholar, filmmaker, visual artist, and media activist, he studies how communities of color, particularly indigenous and migrants, and natural spaces are shaped by modernity and how they mobilize to adapt and resist. Thank you for being with us, Miguel. I'm also excited to introduce Tina Louise Vasquez. She is a first-generation American of Puerto Rican, Jamaican, and Cuban descent. After 10 years of moving away from art, Tina is re-engaging art using visual, textile, and performing mediums to rebuild her artistic practice. By day, she co-runs the consulting firm she co-founded, which is Baiwa Emergent Equity. Excuse me. Thank you for being with us here today, Tina, to speak about your experience in art and in dance as well. And our last panelist we're very excited to have with us is Melissa Villoldas. She is a doctoral candidate at the University of North Carolina School of Social Work, studying the effects of place on the health and well-being of marginalized youth and the role of community connection. Melissa is also a dancer with the Cobo Brothers Dance Company's student dance team and one of the co-hosts of the Mixed Tape podcast alongside her dance partner, Andres Incapié. The podcast builds awareness of the ways in which racist ideas and behaviors manifest in the Afro-Latin dance scene and provides solutions on how to change this in local Afro-Latin dance communities. So thank you so much for being with us again, here with us again, Melissa. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so y'all can see our beautiful panelists. You can see their faces in full. And I'm going to kick off today with a question. I know I just introduced y'all, but if you could introduce yourselves as artists and how does your art kind of tie into your identity? I'll kick it off with Miguel. We'll go in alphabetical order on this one.
Well, thank you very much, Corinne, for having us this morning. And first of all, I want to say thank you to all you teachers. It has been an incredible year, to say the least. We really appreciate all your efforts, your work, your passion to be connected to your children in your classrooms. We know it has been very hard on you, and we appreciate and we are very thankful for your work. That's the first thing I want to say. And then about me, yes, I was born in Colombia, and I was raised there in a rural and urban setting. And I've been working as an artist and helping actually more artists through my years. I ended becoming let's say, a bureaucrat for my government for several years while building collaborative in collaboration with communities, cultural policy to better off the lives of artists down there. It's very hard to be an artist. Then I've been working with at the side within and about artists from Latin America for many years. And I've been working the past 15 years with indigenous artists, mostly working people that work and live in their own communities, in their territories, representing their ways of life. For example, here we have a mola from the Gunadules that show their cosmovision, their connection with their land, but also their amazing craftsmanship, right? That also becomes part of the livelihood and sustenance of women in particular, that are the most vulnerable in their communities. But there are the ones that hold knowledge through non-textual ways, right? Weaving is a practice that keeps people alive. That's something that happens also with Afro and Afro-Latino, Afro-Latin American and diaspora communities. Then I've been working with artists, allowing them to, dream and think wide. This is, for example, part of a book that we completed on this artist, Sergio Sanchez Santamaria, who is an indigenous Afro-Mexican artist that has been working for 25 years in this medium of graphic art, producing very important work connected to a tradition of socially responsible art connected to the Taller de Gráfica Popular one, an output that tried to bring art to the people and produce art from the people. Then socially committed art, that is something that is what we do in our work also in the consortium in Latin American and Caribbean studies. I'm going to leave it like that. I want to hear from Tina and from the rest of the panel. Then what I do is I collaborate, I help, I create ways to show and give voice to this artist.
Perfect, thank you. Tina, do you want to share next?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here. And kind of bizarre for me to be here representing visual art. Most of my professional career was in dance. I danced for a very long time, trained for a very long time, and had a very beautiful, complicated career that was accompanied by other artistic pursuits. So I also studied glass blowing for a while and did that for a time. I still do have a tailoring and fashion design projects on the side where I make clothing. So I have a mixed bag of things that I pull from. But part of what's kind of special about being here today is that part of my dance experience, I started working with dance communities, or particularly this is my first professional foray with a dance company. It was a all Black woman dance company where we focus on social justice and activism and working in the communities. And what I found was that it was really hard for us to do the work in the community and also do the work for ourselves. And we really struggled internally to build institutions, partly because we were doing everything. So it was a bit of a traumatizing experience, and learned a lot of hard lessons. And I think that experience propelled me into this other direction, which was wanting to understand and learn institution building. And at the time, I was convinced that like artists and people of color just don't know how to do this. And that was so not the case. That wasn't true. As I had learned, it was much bigger than that. And structural racism is a huge part of that. But over time, I got further away from the arts. And as I got closer to building institutions, when I started making my way back to art, and even before then, a lot of my artistic interests had been conceptual and research oriented. And so if I was telling stories, it wasn't really personal, or if it was personal, I was kind of lost in the group of stories or concepts that I was sharing as a way to kind of shield my own vulnerability. And so it's been about 10 years since I've been an actual practicing artist on the scene. What I was doing before was creating artistic like workshops around racial equity and justice. And so the pandemic was hard and had a dip in my spirit, and realized that I had to revisit my artistic practice. And that's how my visual artistic practice really started to cultivate, because I started needing to find a way to work through some of these very painful, deep questions that actually have a lot to do with being Afro-Latinx and being queer, and trying to understand what all of that means. And so words weren't doing it anymore. And because my body had been so trained over time, even though been trained in a lot of different forms, and I left my career on Afro-Caribbean and Latin dance forums, there was something about the connection to my body that felt it felt hard to get out of how it was honed. Whereas with the visual arts, I didn't have as much training, and a lot of it was more about play and going back to play and working with my inner child to understand myself better. And through that, I was able to begin working on a body of work called Quien es mi alma, that that now has really given me some direction about how I want to tell my story. And it's something that I'm working towards creating a graphic memoir. As what I'm finding is that sharing my story more intimately helps me find myself in people and help people find themselves in me. And it actually has become more of a healing modality than any of the type of social justice workshops that I have done. So even though I still do that work by day in terms of the consulting firm, and I work with organizations and support institution building, I now have this artistic practice that feels more healing and is connected to more soul work. So that's a little bit about me.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I like that what you said, that words weren't enough, like words weren't cutting it right, and you had to get it out some other way through the arts, which is really beautiful. Great. Thank you, Melissa.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm really inspired by the panelists who are here today. So like you said, my name is Melissa Velotis. I am a New Yorican. So for those who don't know what that means, I'm a Puerto Rican from New York, and I'm also a social worker by profession. But as an artist, I am a dancer. I mostly perform and dance socially to salsa. And I also dance socially to cha-cha and bachata and merengue when they're played at our local dance events. What's drawn me to dance actually was my work in social work. Social work can be very overwhelming. And so you bring a lot of that conversations you hear from your clients home, the stressors from that, you bring that home. And so I was walking past the dance studio every day for 2 years during my master's, and I thought they're having a lot of fun. And I was quite jealous of them. But after I graduated and started working in the field, I thought to myself, well, I'll take some classes for a couple months and see what this is like. I can dance with my dad, who's an excellent dancer. And so I started taking classes. 3 months turned into about 5.5 years. And I've learned so much through my practice of dance at this point in life, through this art form. We sustain an aspect of our culture that really can only be upheld with practice. I do remember my parents talking about learning to dance at local dance events at St. Michael's Church in Brooklyn. But I also remember holidays and birthday parties and family reunions filled with music and dance. My dad is also a DJ, and he's always filled the house with music and dance, both him and my mother, who's my favorite follow to watch. So I really don't know what life is like without music and dance as part of my culture and everyday life, and its meaning and prominence has really grown over the years as part of my identity. In response to the killing of George Floyd, my dance partner and I, Andres Incapié, who's on today, developed a podcast called Mixtape. And so during the pandemic, we would practice in the parking lot. So we were outside and, as safe as possible. And after our dance sessions, we would talk about what's happening with social injustice in the world, in the United States and beyond. And so mostly his idea, he was like, well, why won't we introduce this conversation to our dance community? And so our work developed by trying to understand how racism and anti-Blackness persists in our local dance scene. For anyone who's been a part of the social dance scene, we know that it's marked by inclusivity and everyone's having a good time. Like myself, people start coming to dance because they want a way to escape or to release some feelings that they may have had from the work week. But in our conversations with our podcast guests last summer or the summer before, wow, it's been some time, we realized that for the Black dancers in our community, whether they're African-American or Afro-Latino, they were not participating as actively in the scene because of discrimination and racism. And so with our work, we've been able to elevate Black voices in our community, understand to what extent is our community welcoming to all people, including Black and Afro-Latinx individuals. And in addition to that, we've really grown in developing a platform to share about the Black roots of the social dances that we experience. So salsa, bachata, merengue, samba, so many different types of rhythms. So Thank
Great. Thank you so much for that, Melissa. That's wonderful. I'm sure a lot of teachers can also relate to you as a social worker, right? Needing some sort of artistic expression or escape from work pressures, to put it mildly. So thank you for that. My next question, I'll direct it to Tina, if you want to take this one first. Why is expressing Afro-Latinidad important to you?
That is, I know you sent these questions, and I meditated on this for so long, and I was like, that is such a big question.
It's a big question.
But I actually, something that Melissa said, I think I might start with a story. So my best friend, who's my sister, I refer to her as my sister, in college. We grew up together, and she is Afro-Latinx, but she is black, like dark skin. And she and I would cut up the salsa scene in New York. We would just be out there. We studied in Cuba together. We learned how to do casino rueda. We were like just so into it. And I give that context because there's also another piece of our relationship, and that was that we couldn't talk about our racial dynamic. We could talk about race, but we couldn't talk about our racial dynamic. And it wasn't until almost 10 years into our relationship that we began this discussion. And it's actually a discussion that happened in Alabama. I was driving her back to Texas, and we finally were ripping the Band-Aid off of like, why can't we talk about race in our relationship? And she talked about, as an example, one of many, but the dance scene. And that she said, like, you never noticed that you always got asked to dance first. And I stupidly was like, well, I just thought I was a good dancer. And it opened up these conversations that were incredibly painful. Another example of a piece of that conversation was I went to see her in Cuba. Her Spanish is beautiful. Her Spanish is perfect. My Spanish is terrible. And she introduced me to everyone as her sister. And someone says in Spanish, oh, she was born with a better skin. And my sister translates that to me. And I was so busy feeling flustered by not being able to understand that it didn't even register. And the pain that caused her to not register such a horrible and painful comment and not have her back. There are so many ways in which I didn't understand my own expression of being an Afro-Latinx person. And so it's only been recently that I've been able to quiet myself enough to really ask some of those more painful questions about what does it mean? Because Afro-Latinx identity is as complex as any other race or ethnic group. We're not a monolith. And the way we look on the outside very much impacts the way we experience the world, because people are perceiving us through their own lens. And so though me and my sister may be Afro-Latinx, because we look different, I get to claim that in a very different way than she does. And there's a lot of pain that comes with that. There's a lot of pain because it requires a certain amount of proof of how much you measure up and how much you don't. And she and I both struggle with the measuring up in very different ways. But what I realized is that I was afraid to really engage with those questions, partly because of the way I look. I never felt like I belonged anywhere. I wasn't Black enough for Black people. I wasn't Latin enough for Latin people. I wasn't Caribbean enough for Caribbean people. I'm Puerto Rican, Jamaican, and Cuban, who doesn't speak Spanish all that well. And if I could dance on the dance floor and no one talked to me, I could maybe get away with it, right? So for me, it has been about what does that actually mean to be Afro-Latinx? And part of what I'm discovering is that it isn't just about it isn't just about me. My identity is in relationship to everyone who's around me, the people I love, but also the people who are perceiving me. And it is my responsibility to ask those deeper questions so that I can be in dialogue with people when they make assumptions or when they themselves are struggling to understand. And what I've been finding is that the more honest I am in my art about my own struggles, whether they are fair or not, whether they feel good or not, that actually, regardless of skin color, that people are able to find themselves because they struggle with the same types of things, even if it's coming from a different perspective. So I'll leave it there because I want to hear what the other panelists say.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for your vulnerability. I know when we're talking about issues of identity can be wound opening sometimes. So thank you for sharing that. Melissa, do you want to share next? Again, the question is, wrong one. Why is expressing Afro-Latinidad important to you?
Yeah, sure. So I think expressing Afro-Latinidad, or I guess otherwise stated, embracing Blackness, is important because this is essentially what's necessary for undoing anti-Blackness. So, I speak from the perspective of, US Latinx perspective. And, for such a long time, we've received messages related to drawing near to Mother España, right? We think about Mark Anthony's song Preciosa. It's essentially a love letter to Puerto Rico, and he pays homage to the nobility of Spain. I was listening to it last night. The brave Indio, but makes no mention of African roots. But this is a part of who we are, particularly among the exceptionally melanated. Just like Tina was saying, it's not, it's how you present on the outside is very much, it has implications for how you navigate the world. And so, I think expressing Afro or Black Latinidad means leaning into the contributions of my Black ancestors and keeping them alive, whether that's through my self-identification and especially through the art form of dance.
Perfect, thank you. Miguel, now you do not identify as Afro-Latino, but you still chose kind of the theme of Afro-Latino film for this year's film festival. Can you speak a little bit about why expressing that idea and supporting the understanding and the expression of Afro-Latinidad was important to you, particularly this year? For the film festival, like why did you choose to be
Sure.
in this?
Thank you for the question. Yes, of course, I'm not Afro, but I'm putting this image that you are seeing right there as my image for part of this talk today. This is an image that is trying to mark the Afro presence, the historical Afro presence in the constructions of nations across the Americas, including the US. This is an art piece by an Afro-Colombian artist called Nelson Fori. And what he says is that we have to mark and transform the public space in order for us to be seen as members of the building of nations, right? This is an Afro put on the head of Simón Bolívar, right? The big independent fighter and hero of several nations in Latin America. And he says that he is taking these ideas of marking that invisibility that Melissa was saying and that Tina has suffered by deriving his work from works of other artists, Afro-American artists, such as David Hammons. Then this is a long struggle by peoples of color across the Americas to be seen and to be represented as active members of the construction of the societies we have today. Then the idea of hiding or invisibilizing peoples because of their skin color doesn't recognize that it's thanks to their work, their labor, enforced many times by being kidnapped from their communities long ago and forced to work in the construction of our modernity, our comfort, and then disposing them by certain policies of inclusion, then everything is corrected, and it's not. Then what we do through art and through film in particular is to try to create spaces in which these conversations take place, right? Usually what we use in classrooms, in the universities and at schools are representations of Afro-descendants by non-Black people. And that's one of the big problems, right? We have great pieces that we use all the time. For example, Black in Latin America, the PBS series produced in 2011. Every teacher uses it in high school and in college as the piece that represents the lives and experiences of Afro-Latino Americans. But this is a piece made, commissioned, and produced by white people. Yes, they have some consultants, they did a great job, we are very pleased with that, but we need to decenter that kind of perspective, that view. And what we are having now is a renaissance, an emergence of a new generation of artists, I'm speaking about filmmakers, that are taking that role. And then my role as a programmer, as a curator, as a scholar, is to find ways, avenues to allow that kind of experience to be told, right? To be shown, to be an experience in a critical way. Then we have to recognize that, and we are seeing it in the U.S. Right? There's an incredible emergence of Afro-American cinema, not Black cinema, but cinema that is connected to the experiences of Afro-Americans in the past decade. I mean, in the past 4 years in the Oscars, we had at least 2 films that were single as major pieces. Of course, we are talking about commercial film. This is, of course, the work of Ryan Coogler's in Black Panther, right? We knew all the buzz and fuss about it, or Barry Jenkins' Moonlight, right? Amazing, beautiful author-based film. And we are having that in Latin America. We have collectives of people producing audiovisual pieces, and we have directors doing finally opera primas and sequels of films. And that's what we're trying to show in the Latin American Film Festival. Today, we have a conversation with Johnny Hendricks in Estrosa, who has already 3 feature-length films depicting stories of African women, and he is an Afro man from El Chocó, the poorest province, the Black province of Colombia, completely from the margins, coming to the center, producing 3 feature-length films on its own terms about stories of his mothers and his grandmothers, right? In contemporary times, in Cuba, in Colombia, and in a transnational space. Then those are the spaces we have to give to these stories to surface. Listening to Tina and just remembering the film Negra that we showed yesterday by a contemporary of you, a very young Mexican, Afro-Mexican filmmaker, Nadine de Serrano, telling exactly these stories in the Mexican context, exactly the same ones about the grades of skin color, the being mistreated, not fitting, problems of identity and recognition, all sorts of things that are commonalities of many of your experiences, and that artists like you, like the filmmakers we're presenting through the festival, they give us, ways to understand this and to discuss this and to put it on the table.
Thank you, Miguel. So you bring up a good point about having Afro-Latino people tell their own stories, right? Instead of having white people or non-Afro-Latino people tell their stories. And to me, that's a big part of adjusting misconceptions. So I want to ask this question to the panelists. What are the biggest misconceptions about being Afro-Latino? Melissa, do you want to start us off delving into this question?
Sure. I know Black and Latin America was mentioned just now, Miguel, but as what I see socially, especially on social media, one of the biggest misconceptions about being Afro-Latino is that we aren't Black. And I don't know if Tina could talk to this also. I actually probably use Black more than I use Afro-Latina. And again, speaking from the perspective of someone born and raised in the United States, we belong to a racialized society. That's just what it is. And when we remove the Afro, or when we remove the Black from Latinx, we really attempt to create this narrative that exists without color and habitually associate ourselves with our countries of origin or our parents' countries of origin, devoid of color and context. In the United States, for Afro-Latinos, we have a Black experience that cannot just be embodied by calling it Latinx or Latino experience. And for me, Afro-Latino means being Black, and there are, again, several social media pages out there reminding folks every day that there are synonymous.
Thank you. Thank you. Tina, do you want to add anything or respond?
Nope, she landed that one. That is exactly what she said it better than I would have. So thank you, Melissa.
Great, thank you. I want to switch the conversation over a little bit to more of our art forms. And so we've got dancers on this panel. We have visual artists, we have filmmakers. I think most of you are kind of delving into multiple art forms of expression. What are some of the Afro-Latino roots of your art form? So in dance or early visual artists or filmmakers that represent your art form, and what are the roots going back to Africa for that? Miguel, do you want to get into maybe early film with that? Start us off with film?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, we don't have to generalize, but Melissa had said something that is very important, right? We don't, because of political correctness or politeness, people don't talk the issues as they are, right? If we're going to talk about the experiences of Afro-Latinos, we talk about the experiences of Black people in context, right? And what are they, the different contexts? The national, the community, the local ones, the regional ones, the national ones, the international ones, and then this overarching context that is modernity, coloniality, right? That the idea of race has been a human construct, a European construct in the 15th and 16th centuries that deprive peoples of different skin tone to the rights in order to build what we have, right? This economic system called capitalism. And there is lots of research on that, and Latin American scholars mostly had pointed to that, allowing finally for people of color to speak, indigenous peoples and Black peoples, to speak from their own experiences and contexts and histories. Then yes, there are commonalities that we can find in very strong ways in which the transmission of knowledge through the generations of Black peoples or indigenous peoples or even white peoples happen, right? Orality, right? And in the case of many of the Black communities, orality connected to rhythms, right? Sounds that create a different kind of tempo in which communication happens. And this embodied knowledge through generations happens through that orality, stories, tempos, rhythms that then are embodied in movement. That is what Tina says, right? You express yourself, your knowledge, your being through your body. Then we have, and your body is through movement, and the way you treat your body, what you do with it, right? Then the whole issue of hair, hair braids, but also the way you build your body through the movement, right? Then the Black body is powerful because of that three-dimensional way of embodied knowledge and history, right? Orality, all the stories, the rhythm, the tempo of them, sound, and then the body, and the body becomes this beautiful tool that for many whites, and this is psychoanalysis that we have lots of research on that, the fear of the white man towards the Black man is that this hypersexualization of the body of the Black man that is so powerful, so beautiful, so strong, because connects all the dimensions, while the white body has become lazy because it has to use the Black body to build its economic foundation. Then there is fear in there, right? There is psychology and psychoanalysis connected to that. And we have it in films. For example, there is an historical piece. I can show you just a little segment of that. Let me show you. Let's see here. I think this is one of the earliest films in the Brazilian New Black filmmaking, and it's called Alma do Sonho. Let me show you just like a minute of that. And it's showing the body of the Black man. It's a portrait of the body of the Black man. Through sound and through some religiosity too. It's not being ashamed of your color, of your body, your skin, your build, right? Then it's a beautiful, like, experimental piece, no words, of the description of this body, and the body starts sweating through the slow description of this man, because it's hardened by labor, but here is contrived by this kind of slow motion dance that this Black man's body is going through. And this is just one of the historical pieces of a Brazilian Black film. I'm going to just leave it there. I can just share the, fortunately, it's open and free on the internet. That tells about that, right? This masks that we have, and we don't name the things that have to be named. And through film, through art, you can do it.
Perfect. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you for that. So a lot of that was about the body, which is a really great way to ask Tina and Melissa if they're like, what are the Afro-Latino roots? I'm going to go with dance, because you both are dancers, of course. If you could kind of speak a little bit of that Afro-Latino element to dance that I think is overlooked in a lot of Latin American dance forms. Melissa, do you want to touch on this?
Sure. So generally, the Afro roots come from the consequence of the transatlantic slave trade, where traditions, dance, music from our ancestors' home countries and villages migrated with them to the Americas, where they were stolen from their land. This is the obvious root, right? But in terms of how it shows up in dance, there's the groundedness of salsa, bachata, merengue that all come from African movement. Our guests on the podcast do a much better job of talking about this than I do, but one of our guests, Nettie Torres, who's Afro-Cuban, talks about the improvisational characteristics of the dance, particularly in social dancing and solo work that comes from the African influence. There's also the movement associated with orishas or saints, as seen in people who practice the Yoruba religion, or people who don't practice the Yoruba religion, and incorporate that movement into salsa and other rhythms. And then here in the United States, our guests on our salsa episode talk a lot about the incorporation of Lindy Hop and the hustle that creates turn patterns and pushing and pulling of the partner work in salsa dancing as we see it today. And as many of you may or may not know, Lindy Hop and hustle has copious Black and Afro-Latinx influences written all over it. And I'll just shout out my dad who joined the Zoom call, who is an excellent hustle dancer. And so I like to think that's his contribution to the salsa dance as well. You can learn a lot about the Black roots of these rhythms in our podcast, actually. So we have excellent guests who talk about that.
Perfect, thank you. And we definitely have, at the end of this session, I have a whole list that I'm going to share with everyone of great resources, which includes the podcast. So please stay tuned. You will get a link to that to hear. Awesome, thank you, Melissa. Tina, did you want to add anything or mention anything about dance or art, visual arts?
Yeah, actually, there's two things I wanted to talk about. Yeah, Melissa, you killing it, girl. That was an amazing way to just encapsulate some of the historical roots that that different parts of Africa and West Africa have contributed to our movement and culture. I wanted to give another example kind of embedded in what Melissa said and then move to the visual art perspective. So in Cuba, there is rumba. Rumba is a dance form. They consider it a street form. It very much influences Orisha dance and back and forth, those rhythms. There's a lot of relationship in terms of the rhythms and the drums. But also what I love about, and this kind of goes back to the misconception, a lot of Afro and indigenous communities were matriarchal. And there's a certain way that women are respected that gets filtered through whiteness and misunderstood and misconstrued. So in rumba, and this is something that my sister and I have been doing, she does a fair amount, a tremendous amount of study on rumba, did her dissertation on that. But in terms of the dance piece, as she and I were exploring it, one of the things that we found really beautiful was that, for those who don't know, just real quick basic stuff. Rumba is a dance between, in the traditional sense of gender, or let me not even say that, maybe a more binary perspective of gender, male and female. That the female is enticing the man, and there's a movement called a bakunao. And that bakunao is some action towards the female, and it's sexual in nature. It's considered the injection, and that this woman is enticing this man, and this man is trying to get at her in some way. And so you have this whole thing going on, and this little flirtation, and the man's coming around, and the woman is to block the bakunao, and it's a play. But what people don't understand is that, or I should say the misconception is that people think that the person who's in control is the man, and that the man is trying to get at this woman, and that this woman is trying to protect herself. But in reality, the woman is the person who's in control, and the woman is using her expression of femininity as a way to dialogue with this man in terms of talking about boundaries and what's allowed and what's not allowed. And then there's a playfulness with that. So there's an invitation. It's not necessarily an attack. And this invitation to be engaging in this play, that she gets to choose when and where it goes down, and then how it goes down. And what I love about that is that this relationship between genders, that through whiteness has these very stereotypical and toxic masculine narratives, is actually quite different when we look at the cultural roots of it. And so I feel like the dance offers a lot of information and philosophy about a way of life if we take a closer glance at what that means. Rueda Casino is another, I know I'm staying in Cuba for a second, but Rueda Casino is the same idea. This is a communal dance. The leading and following is actually a very shared experience. And so when Melissa talked about the circularity of these movements, it's not just corporal, like and in your body where you're moving circularly, but you're also in relationship to other people. It's a communal experience. And I think that that speaks a lot to the resiliency of Black people as and having to survive the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism. So that's, the dance piece. On the visual arts side, there's a book called Aesthetics of the Cool by Robert Ferris Thompson that I highly recommend. He's a white dude, but he has done a lot to, build credit and trustworthiness with Black communities. And in this book, he talks about how the nature of coolness, this aesthetic of coolness, comes from African people and has found its way in mainstream culture because of Black people. And that it's something that if you take more time to analyze, you can capture it. Another offshoot of the aesthetics of the cool, some of his other texts also talk about craftsmanship and textiles. And so let's go with New York. If you go to Queens and you look at all of the iron grates and all of the iron grate fencing around homes or around churches, those are African symbols. Those are African images that are often not legible to those who don't know or don't understand. And so Africans, not just the whole continent, but specifically the portions that were pulled in through the transatlantic slave trade, have made its presence known and are not necessarily legible or recognized because of how they've been able to make themselves recognizable to each other. So a lot of the ways in which we see, basic architecture or structure or even aesthetics that contribute to that architecture have a lot to do with this African influence that's quite subtle, but very beautiful. And it impacts our society to the point where we don't even recognize it for it being African. It sounds just American, or it's just, wherever that, or it's just Cuban, but it actually has very specific ties to African cultures.
May I build on 2 points that Melissa and Tina were talking about? And yes, of course, in visual arts, we have an entire rewriting of our history to the finally recognition of the sources of the founding fathers of modern art, Picasso, as a matter of fact, or Matisse, on deriving many of their early modernist cubist, actually, techniques from interactions with art coming from Africa. Early in the 20th century, museums, due to colonization of Africa by European powers, France more particularly, were filling their museums with African pieces, decontextualizing them, of course, taking them out of their spaces, and creating the idea of this aesthetic. The aesthetic was taken by the modern artists, Picasso and Matisse mostly, and created an entire new way to look at the world, right? Modern art is born out of African images. As well, modern textile and abstract art comes also heavily invested on the review of how textiles in Mesoamerica and the Andes took place. Then we have finally rewriting the sources of modern art and the entire visuality of the 20th century, that is our same visuality of the 21st century, thanks to those sources. Then that's very important. The second point that Tina and Lisa were talking about is the role of women. Yes, modernity coloniality is based on a patriarchal structure. But African and indigenous communities mostly are matriarchal in the structure, in the social structure. There is a parity and even a more heavily presence of female in the political side, let's say, in the making decisions of the well-being of communities. And that's connected many times to the way writers, Afro writers, Afro-Latino and African-American writers talk about their stories, but it's exactly the same way filmmakers are doing it. Then again, sorry for bringing here, I'm going to show you the NC Latin American Film Festival. And most of the films that we're showing have a female Afro-Latina, Afro-Latin American protagonist. And the films are about them, right? In Negra, yesterday, were the stories of 5 Afro-Mexican women. Tonight, Candelaria, the story of a mixed couple, mulata and Black men in Cuba, musicians and dancers. You want to watch old folks performing music and dance in Cuba today, the story of Candelaria, beautiful story. We'll be showing the stories of indigenous women, Jedani, Rosa Iris in Haiti, the DR, in Stateless, Guillermina on Wednesday, Mama Icha, an Afro Latin American Latina woman that wants to go back to their origin from the US to Latin America, Rosa Chumbe, Choco, all our stories of women made by men and women. Then this is really interesting, right? The centrality of women as the holders of community, not only family, community, and society in many of these on these peoples. And just wanted to say that and also put my advertisement there. And all the films are free and open for the public and mostly virtual. You just go and click and you get the content at the time of the day. You're muted, Corinne.
I said a whole spiel and no one heard. Sorry. Thank you, Miguel. Yeah, we really want to also have people, come in and see these films and explore this issue, not just through intellectual discussion, but also through the art forms, right? This is all about understanding through art. So thank you for that. I do want to leave some time for audience questions. So I'm going to leave kind of the last question is kind of a big one. But why is Afro-Latinidad important for young people and their teachers, many of who are with us today? Why is that topic important for teachers and students to understand? Melissa, do you want to tackle this one first?
I would love to tackle this question because now I get to put on my social work hat, right? I think if we think about young people, particularly youth, we know that developmentally they're in a stage of identity formation. As Eric Erickson would say, I'm sure my teachers are familiar with this. So the teenage years in particular are marked by navigating the aspects of the self that feel true, the aspects of the self that feel safe to share with others. And so as youth work to understand who they are and who society wants them to be, essentially, it's important to expose them to all parts that make them who they are. So for US Afro-Latinos, you often have two options, or at least this was the experience for myself. You cling to either the African-American experience or you cling to the mainstream ideas of what it means to be Latinx. And so for me as a teenager and in my early college years, I couldn't relate to either, naturally, because neither of them were fully part of who I was or who I am. And so it wasn't until I unpacked the anti-Black messages that I was getting essentially from everywhere, from film, media, family, friends, school, before I was able to understand for myself what it means to be Afro-Latinx or to be Black. And these messages were also coming from the Latinx community. So I don't want to say that it was only mainstream US culture there. And so anyway, for what teachers should know is that this time in life can really catapult youth, students into a space of safety and security in who they are as an individual, and will absolutely support their success in many aspects of their adult life if you can engage students in understanding what it means to be Black, what it means to be Afro-Latinx.
Thank you. That was really beautifully put. Perfect. Thank you. Especially coming from a social worker, I think it has that extra impact. Great. Thank you. Tina, do you want to add anything?
I'll add a couple of things, but I echo what Melissa is saying is so on point, and so it's so beautiful to hear it from a social work perspective. And what I would like to add to that, for maybe like the organizational development side, my brain and institution building side, social justice side, race is illogical. Like there's nothing logical about this. This is a system solely built to establish power for a certain amount of people. And when you're having to navigate that delicate part of your life where you are trying to understand who you are through a system that is illogical, that makes no sense, the kinds of damage that can occur and be long lasting, I can't begin to tell you the gravity of what that means for someone's life trajectory. It can be the meaning of what they feel like they're even capable of doing. It will define how they see their potential and how they manifest their skills and their talents. And this idea of being seen and feeling a sense of belonging, those are core elements to our identity formation. If we can't feel like we belong, and if we can't feel that we can't be seen, then we don't know how to function. And so then we start functioning with only pieces or parts of ourselves, or shaving things off to be able to belong. And it creates a tension and an internal conflict that can lead to adverse health effects. I'm sure Melissa and all of you are aware of like ACEs. And race is one of those ACEs that has been getting some credit recently, but wasn't originally when the ACEs were created. But race can take a huge toll on one's mental, spiritual, physical growth. And so for teachers, it's really important to understand that you are trying to help students navigate something that makes no sense. And you're having to help them make sense of it. And with that, as I'm raising my own children, I'm trying to understand, how do I get them to connect to their humanity first? How do I get them to identify who they are as a person, with personality, with interests, with love, and struggles? And they came to this earth with their own set of lessons that they have to learn, and that all of that is going to get filtered through this racial caste system. And so how do I get them to see themselves first and then understand the filtration process, rather than understanding themselves through the filtration process and then trying to discover who they are? So what you can do in offering support is making sure that they're not gaslit, and being really honest with them when they are struggling, that struggle is real, and they're trying to make sense of something that doesn't make any sense. And Latinidad is super problematic, and the Latinidad is an erasure of the complexity of our identity. And that's why we have to say Afro-Latinx, because we have to mark it. And when it is marked, it carries a burden and a weight that can be beautiful, but that can be heavy. And so I think if you understand that, and you can walk with your students from a place of humility and asking a lot of questions and being really curious about their experiences, and helping them to navigate them back to themselves, rather than trying to understand themselves through a system first, I think they might have a better chance at saving their own souls, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. Thank you so much for that, Tina. That was really beautiful. And thank you, Melissa, as well for those insights. Thank you. I'm going to open it up to our audience. So thank you so much, Melissa, Tina, and Miguel for answering my questions. I want to open it up to those on our screens around around North Carolina and beyond to ask their questions to you. You can either put them in the chat, feel free to do that, or since it's a small group today, you can also